Today, I have a story that will definitely make you rethink the boundaries of friendship. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon when I was just minding my own business at home when a call from my best friend Tom changed everything. I had no idea that a simple errand would lead me down a path I never expected. So, what happens when you walk into your best friend's house and his mom opens the door wearing nothing but a towel? Well, let's just say that was the moment everything started to change. Buckle up because this one is a ride. It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons when everything felt slow. I was at home scrolling through my phone when I noticed a missed call from Ethan. He had left his headphones at my place the night before after our hangout, and apparently he needed them back. No big deal, I thought. I grabbed them from the table and texted him that I was heading over to drop them off. Ethan's house wasn't far, just a short drive across town. I knew his mom Sophia was always around, but she usually stayed in her room or kept to herself. I never really thought about her much other than the fact that she was a good-looking woman for her age. I mean, she was in her early 40s, but she didn't look much older than that. Still, she was just Ethan's mom to me, nothing more. When I knocked on the door, I wasn't expecting her to open it, but she did. Wearing nothing but a towel, her hair damp from the shower. She looked surprised, but not embarrassed. I didn't know where to look. My eyes quickly darted away from her, but I could feel the awkwardness hanging in the air. "Hey, Jake," she said, smiling. "Ethan's out for a while. What brings you here?" I stammered for a second before holding up the headphones. "I just came to drop these off. Didn't realize you'd be busy." Sophia laughed softly, brushing a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Oh, I'm not busy. Just got out of the shower. Want to come in for a bit?" I hesitated, unsure whether I should, but I stepped inside anyway. I mean, it wasn't like she was a stranger. It's just, well, it felt different. I'd always seen her as this poised, motherly figure, never as someone I might feel weirdly attracted to. We sat down in the living room and she offered me a drink. The conversation started off casual, but as we talked more, I realized she was opening up in ways I hadn't expected. We talked about life, about how she was feeling about the changes happening around her, and about how she sometimes felt isolated, even though she was surrounded by people. For a moment, it felt like we weren't talking about her being Ethan's mom at all. It was just her and me having a real conversation. I could tell she was genuinely interested in what I had to say. And in that moment, I started seeing her in a different light. There was something more to her than just the woman who raised Ethan. She smiled again, a soft, almost secretive smile. "You've grown up so much, Jake. It's kind of hard to believe. I still remember when you were just a little kid running around with Ethan." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. There was something in the air between us now. Something unspoken but palpable. I could feel it, the connection, the subtle tension, but I wasn't sure what it meant. All I knew was that I didn't want to leave yet. She stood up, walking over to the kitchen, and I followed. As she passed by, I caught the faintest scent of her perfume mixed with the clean, fresh smell of her shower. For a brief moment, it felt like she was more than just Ethan's mom. She was a woman, a person with her own thoughts, her own desires. "Thanks for coming by," she said, turning toward me. "I needed someone to talk to." I smiled, feeling a bit of warmth spreading through me. "Anytime." But as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had changed, and I wasn't sure where it was headed. The next time I saw Sophia, it wasn't planned. I was at the grocery store picking up a few things for dinner when I bumped into her in the aisle. She was looking at a jar of marinara sauce. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and for a moment, I wondered why I hadn't noticed before how effortlessly beautiful she was. It wasn't just her looks. It was the way she carried herself, like she knew something the rest of us didn't. I hadn't expected to see her here, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to act. We hadn't really talked since that awkward morning when I dropped off the headphones, but there was something about that conversation that lingered with me. Something about the way she had looked at me or the way she'd smiled. Something was different, but at the time, I just shrugged it off as a fluke. "Jake," she called, noticing me. Her voice had a warm, easygoing quality to it, the kind that made you feel instantly comfortable. I smiled, trying to act normal. "Hey, Sophia didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, just grabbing a few things for dinner," she said, gesturing to her cart. "You need anything?" It was a simple question, but it led to a conversation that lasted far longer than I expected. We talked about food, about the weather, about random small talk, but there was an underlying tension between us that I couldn't shake. It was subtle. Just a glance here, a small smile there, but it was there. "Are you doing anything tonight?" she asked suddenly, almost as if she was testing me. I wasn't sure how to answer. "Not really, just hanging out at home." "Well, Ethan's out with some friends tonight. I was thinking of making dinner. You should come by. It'd be nice to have someone to talk to." The invitation caught me off guard. My first instinct was to decline. After all, what did I really have in common with her outside of Ethan? But there was something in her voice that made it hard to say no. "Yeah, sure," I said before I even had time to reconsider. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. But as I followed her home later that evening, the thought of spending time alone with Sophia made my heart race in a way I didn't quite understand. When I arrived, I was greeted with the familiar warmth of her house. The smell of fresh food was in the air, and it felt comfortable, too comfortable. Sophia was already in the kitchen humming to herself as she prepared dinner. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. It was hard to reconcile this woman in front of me with the woman I'd known as Ethan's mom. There was something different about her now. Something real. "Take a seat," she called over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." I sat at the kitchen table, trying not to make it obvious that I was nervous. She seemed so casual, so at ease, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting between us. It wasn't just the way she moved or the way she smiled. It was how she made me feel. More than just a friend's mom. We ate, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about life, about how things weren't always as simple as they seemed. She told me about how she missed the excitement of her younger years, about how life with Ethan had become a routine. There was an honesty in her voice that I hadn't expected. She was tired of pretending everything was okay. I listened, nodding, not quite sure how to respond. But as she talked, I couldn't help but notice how attractive she was, how her eyes seemed to shine when she was passionate about something. She wasn't just Ethan's mom. She was a woman with her own thoughts, her own life. And for the first time, I was seeing her as just that. "Thanks for this," I said after dinner, standing up to clear the table. Sophia smiled at me, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. "I'm glad you came by. It's been a while since I had a real conversation with someone." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, something that didn't need words. As I left, she gave me a hug, her hand lingering on my back for a moment longer than necessary. It was casual, friendly, but something about it felt different. "Take care, Jake," she said quietly. I walked back to my car, my head spinning. The simple act of spending time with her had left me unsettled yet strangely drawn to her. The next few days felt strange. I couldn't stop thinking about the night at Sophia's house. It was so casual, so simple, and yet something about it had thrown me off. It wasn't that she did anything overtly inappropriate, but the way she looked at me, the way she listened, it made me feel like we were connecting on a different level. I'd spent plenty of time at Ethan's house before, but this time it was different, and I hated myself for thinking about it so much. I tried to push it out of my mind. Ethan called me up a couple of days later, asking if I wanted to go grab some drinks. I agreed, figuring it'd be a good way to get my mind off of things. But as soon as I got to the bar, I saw Sophia sitting at the counter with her friends. She waved at me, and I couldn't help but wave back. Her smile was as effortless as ever, but there was a little more warmth in it than usual, something that made me feel uneasy. "Hey, Jake," she greeted me when I walked up. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Just here to hang out with Ethan. Didn't know you were coming." "Yeah, I thought I'd meet up with some old friends. It's been a while since I had a night out," she replied, her eyes lingering on me a little longer than necessary. I couldn't ignore the tension. It was like a quiet undercurrent running between us, always there, but never fully acknowledged. I should have known better. I should have excused myself and left, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself sitting at the bar, chatting with her, laughing at her jokes, and pretending like nothing was out of the ordinary. Tom eventually joined us and we all started talking about random stuff, work, college things we used to do when we were younger. The conversation was light, but I could feel my attention drifting. Every time Sophia laughed, every time she glanced at me, I felt like there was something more between us. It was like a secret that neither of us was brave enough to voice aloud. At one point, Tom stepped away to grab a drink, leaving me alone with her. I didn't meant to, but I asked, "So how have you really been, Sophia?" She paused, her smile faltering for just a second before she answered, "I'm fine, just a little lonely, I guess." The admission caught me off guard for a moment. She seemed vulnerable, a side of her I hadn't seen before. It was almost like I was talking to someone completely different, someone who wasn't just Ethan's mom. "I get that," I replied. "It can be tough sometimes." She nodded, and we both fell into a brief silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. I found myself wanting to say more to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. Instead, I just watched her, trying to gauge if she meant what she said. Was she really lonely, or was she hinting at something more? Tom returned with another round of drinks and the moment passed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted between me and Sophia. She didn't seem like just a friend's mom anymore. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt like I was seeing her in a different light, a dangerous light. After a while, we all decided to leave. I walked out of the bar with Tom, but I couldn't stop thinking about that brief conversation, what she meant by lonely. Was she just talking about being bored, or was she hinting at something more? I had to admit, a part of me was intrigued. While I got home, I sat on my couch replaying the night over and over in my head. It was only then that I realized this wasn't just some innocent hangout. There was something deeper happening. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it pulling me in, and I was starting to wonder if I could resist, but maybe I didn't want to resist. The following days felt heavier than usual. I kept replaying that night at the bar of my head. Sophia's quiet confession of loneliness, the way her eyes lingered a little too long on mine, the shift in air every time we spoke. It was all starting to feel too real. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a moment. But deep down, I knew it wasn't Tom, and I'd always been close. He was my best friend, but lately, every time I hung out with him, my mind would wander back to Sophia. I catch myself thinking about her smile, the way she moved, the way she seemed so different than what I had always known. And every time I caught myself thinking about her, I hated myself a little more. That Saturday afternoon, I decided to clear my head. I called Ethan up and suggested we go to the park and play some basketball just like old times. I figured it might help me focus on something else for a while. When I got to the court, Ethan was already there shooting hoops by himself. He looked up when he saw me. "Hey man, you're late." "Sorry, had to take care of something," I said, forcing a smile as I grabbed the ball from him. We spent the next hour running around making jokes, trying to outdo each other with shots. But I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, drifting to thoughts of Sophia. It was when we were taking a break, sitting on the side of the court, that Ethan brought her up. "You think my mom's doing okay?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to act casual. "Well, she's been kind of distant lately, you know. I don't know if she's been stressed or what, but she hasn't been herself. I think she's been going through something." I looked at him surprised. Sophia had always seemed so strong, so composed. The last thing I'd expected was for her to be struggling. "I didn't know. Have you talked to her about it?" I asked, unsure of how to respond. Ethan shrugged. "Not really. She keeps brushing me off. I don't want to push her, but I know she's not all right." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. I wanted to tell him everything, admit that I felt something for his mom, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. "Maybe she just needs some space," I said, trying to keep things light. "Yeah, maybe," Ethan said, but his tone was heavy. He didn't seem convinced. We finished up the game and went back to Ethan's house, but as I walked through the door, I couldn't help but feel that familiar tension building in the pit of my stomach. Sophia was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when we entered, smiling as if nothing was wrong. "Hey guys!" She greeted us, her voice as warm as ever, but I could see the tiredness in her eyes, the way she held herself, almost like she was pretending. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said, sitting down next to her. "You doing all right?" Sophia hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, just been a long week." I could tell she was brushing it off, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what to say. My heart was beating in my chest, louder than I cared to admit. I made my way to the kitchen to grab a drink, trying to give myself a moment to breathe. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I needed to escape it for just a second. But then, just as I was about to pour myself a glass of water, Sophia appeared in the doorway, standing there with her arms crossed. "Jake," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I turned around surprised. Sure. What's up?" She stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind her. The sudden closeness between us felt like a jolt. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as she came closer. "I just wanted to thank you for being there the other night," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "It really meant a lot to me." I swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. "Of course you know I'm always here if you need to talk." She nodded, and for a moment neither of us spoke. There was something unspoken hanging in the air, something that neither of us was willing to acknowledge. Then almost too casually she said, "You know Ethan's a good kid. He's been through a lot, but he's got a good heart." I nodded again, unsure of where this conversation was going. But as she stood there, her eyes lingering on mine, I felt that familiar spark, the one that made my heart race, made everything feel like it was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. "Yeah, he really does," I replied, my voice quieter than I meant. She smiled faintly, but there was something else in her expression, something that made me wonder if she was thinking the same thing I was, and for a moment I almost asked her what was really going on. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, the silence between us thickening, both of us unsure how to proceed. Finally, she broke the silence, saying, "Thanks again, Jake." "Anytime," I said, though I didn't quite mean it in the same way anymore. It had been a week since the night in the kitchen with Sophia. The conversation we had wasn't anything extraordinary, but it left a lasting impression on me. Every time I saw her, that same tension lingered just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. I couldn't tell if she was aware of it, or if it was just me projecting my feelings onto her. Either way, the air between us had shifted, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't. Ethan and I hung out as usual. He was his regular self, laughing, joking, trying to get my mind off of whatever was bothering me, but it wasn't working. I kept glancing at Sophia whenever she was in the room, noticing the little things. Her way of tilting her head when she spoke, the way her eyes seemed to lock onto mine, just a little too long when our paths crossed. It was subtle, but it was there. It was a Saturday afternoon when things changed. Ethan was out with friends, leaving me alone at their house. I hadn't expected to be left by myself, but I didn't mind. I needed space. I needed time to figure out what was happening between me and Sophia. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her voice from the hallway. "Jake." I looked up, surprised to see her standing there, her expression unreadable. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel my heart rate increase. She stepped into the room, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Can we talk?" My stomach tightened. I nodded. "Yeah, of course." Sophia sat down next to me on the couch. The distance between us was minimal. It felt as though the room had gotten smaller. The familiar feeling of tension washed over me once again. "I've been thinking about our conversations lately," she began, her voice low, almost hesitant, "and I feel like I need to apologize. I know I've been distant. I've been struggling with some things, and I didn't want to burden anyone with it." I looked at her, genuinely surprised. I hadn't expected her to open up like this, especially not after everything that had happened. "It's okay," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant by it. "I understand. You don't need to apologize." She smiled faintly, but there was something else behind her eyes, something unspoken. She didn't seem entirely convinced by my response. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice soft. "But I also feel like I've been pushing some boundaries with you, and I just want to be honest about it." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The conversation I'd been dreading and in some strange way hoping for. I didn't know where it was going, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more cautious. Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I think you know what I mean. There's been this connection between us, and I can't keep pretending like it's not there." I froze. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known it, of course. But hearing it from her made everything feel more real, more complicated. "I don't want to make things awkward, Jake," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't know how to deal with it, but I don't want to pretend it isn't there anymore." I stared at her, my mind racing. There was the truth, and it felt like everything in me was screaming that I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be having this conversation, but I was, and I couldn't take it back. "I don't want to make things awkward either," I said, trying to sound calm, trying to keep the situation from spiraling, "but I don't know what you want me to say." Sophia looked at me, her gaze intense. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the things we both couldn't say. Finally, she reached out her hand, brushing lightly against mine. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a spark, something unspoken but undeniable. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't move. "This isn't just some silly crush, Jake," she whispered, her eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know what it is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I knew this was wrong. I knew it would ruin everything if anyone ever found out. But on the other hand, the connection I felt with Sophia was undeniable, and part of me didn't want it to stop. I looked at her, my voice shaky. "Are you sure about this? I mean this. Whatever this is." She nodded, her fingers tightening around mine. "Yes, I'm sure." And just like that, the line we'd both been tiptoeing around had been crossed. We didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to say. The moment had passed, but the weight of it lingered. We both knew where this was heading, and we both understood the risks. But for now, all we could do was lean into the silence, knowing that our lives would never be the same again. It had been a year since everything started. A whole year of keeping our secret, of navigating the strange balance between our everyday lives and the quiet connection we shared. And honestly, it felt like a lifetime in some ways, like a lifetime of small moments that only we understood. We never talked about it much. The us that had started with that one night when Sophia opened the door in a towel hadn't changed, but the way we lived with it had. In a way, it was the most natural thing in the world, and in another way, it was a strange, delicate thing that we had to protect. But we'd both agreed from the start that what mattered was our happiness, and that happiness had been built on trust. It was a trust that had allowed us to keep it secret, to share everything with each other without anyone else knowing. It was in a way our own little world. Every time I saw Ethan, I felt a pain of guilt. Not that I wanted to tell him, not that I even felt it was right to do so. But the weight of the secret still pressed down on me. I wasn't sure if I'd ever get used to it, but I knew one thing for sure. We had both chosen this. And as much as it was complicated, it felt right. Sophia and I saw each other as much as we could, but not too much. We never pushed the boundaries. When we were together, it was always private, always away from prying eyes. The hardest part was pretending when Ethan would drop by to visit his mom, not being able to show even the smallest sign of affection, not being able to do the little things couples do without making it obvious. We were careful, and I learned to appreciate those little moments more than anything. The secret glances, the quiet smiles, the occasional touch when no one was around. Those were the moments that kept everything intact. Sometimes in the quiet of her house, we'd talk about what would happen if things ever came out. We never had any solid answers, only vague ideas of how we might handle it if the truth was exposed. But for the most part, we didn't dwell on it. We lived in the present, in the stolen moments when we could just be ourselves without anyone else judging or questioning. One Saturday evening, a year after everything had started, I found myself at Sophia's house again, sitting on the couch just like the first time we'd had that conversation. The house was quiet. Ethan had gone out with his friends, and we had the place to ourselves. It felt normal, comfortable, just the way we had learned to live together. We didn't need to talk about our feelings as much anymore. The relationship had settled into a rhythm, and though it had been unconventional from the start, it felt like something I didn't want to lose. Sophia was sitting next to me, as beautiful and composed as ever, but there was a softness in her that made her seem more relaxed. It had taken time, but we had both learned how to handle the complexities of our situation. We had grown into the secret, made peace with it, and found a way to make it work. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Sophia asked, her voice low and gentle, breaking the silence. I smiled, leaning back into the couch. "All the time. Honestly, I still can't believe we've been able to keep it up for this long. It doesn't feel like it's been a year." She laughed softly, her head resting on my shoulder. "It doesn't, does it? But at the same time, it feels like we've always been here, like this was meant to happen." I nodded, my hand brushing against hers. "Yeah, it's weird, but in the best way. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this, but here we are, and I wouldn't change a thing." She turned her head, meeting my eyes with that same look, the one that made everything feel just a little more real. "Me neither, you know," she said softly. "I think we've both handled this well. I'm glad we never let anyone know. It's been ours, just ours." It was true. It was ours, and that felt more important than anything else. "I'm happy," I said quietly, squeezing her hand. "We're happy. That's all that matters." For the rest of the evening, we just sat there, comfortable in our silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. A year had passed, and we had managed to navigate it without anyone knowing. We had kept our secret, kept our connection, and most importantly, kept our happiness intact. And as the night came to a close, I realized that this was how I wanted things to stay. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. And sometimes that was enough. So, what do we really take away from this crazy experience? Maybe it's the complexity of human relationships and how easily the line between friendship and something more can blur. But here's the thing, did I overstep? Was this just a simple misunderstanding, or did it reveal something deeper about both of us? Let me know what you think. Can friendships truly survive moments like this, or do they inevitably change forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep me motivated to create more content like this. Or, hey, press number 1 if you want to see more shocking stories like this one. Your support means the world to me.